Board.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Revolution East Bay's monthly meeting. We tend to generally, for our meetings, have a lot of endorsements we're doing and discussion about things like that. Today, because we're in the middle of an endorsement cycle, we're going to have a nice town hall about housing and renters and how it all plays together. And I know homelessness will come into it. And it's a housing crisis and it affects everybody. And really, we'd like to have some positive solutions, and maybe people can connect with each other through this and make a little bit of a difference in what's going on with housing. So we have a lot of people here today. Let me just read the list. And they're all people, they're either writing legislation or they're activists, everywhere in between, trying to get things done on housing. So we have Jovanka Beckles from AC Transit and Alfred Twu, who has many hats. Today he's going to be speaking about California Democratic Party and the caucus, the Renters Caucus, of which he's an officer in. Nikki Fortuna Boss, City Council of Oakland, running for Board of Supervisors in Alameda County, very involved with housing issues, renters issues. Aisha Wahab, our state senator, she does so much on housing. Leah Simon-Weisberg, who is the chair of the Berkeley Rent Stabilization Board, and she's just written something. We're around Berkeley really trying to get it on the ballot. I'm sure she'll talk about that. Laura Nakamura, Concord City Council. Kalimah Priforce, Emeryville City Council. Toni Grimm, an activist from the Alameda Renters Coalition. Margot Smith, who's running for state assembly to hopefully replace you know who. And she's so solid on housing. And I hope I didn't miss anybody here. So we're actually going to get started now. And our first guest is Jovanka Beckles. She's currently on AC Transit as the board of directors. She was former city council person in Richmond for I believe 8 years, and she dealt with a lot of renter issues in those days. And I know she'll talk about that. Now she's running to be one of our state senators, and she has our revolution support, and I hope everybody's support out there. So we're ready to start now. Jovanka, welcome.
Yay.
Hey, thank you, everybody, and thank you to those of you who are just logging on, because we were just talking a little while ago about this amazing victory that just happened. We did that, so don't congratulate me. Let's congratulate each other. Yes, because we did that together. And what I maintain is when we organize, we what? We win, right? When we organize, we win. And we did that together. We organized incredibly and we won. And now let's go on and win this in November by our continued amazing collaboration, collaborative efforts and strategies, and win for the people, because this is about a movement, y'all. Thank you. As Carol mentioned, when I was on the Richmond City Council, played a significant role in bringing forward the first rent control policy in California in 30 years. We did that together. And really it set off this course now of us having fighting for statewide rent control. Now it lost before, but I had a chance to meet Michael Weinstein, who's organizing this effort this time around, Justice for Renters. I personally endorse that. I endorse it, and I'm asking as many of you who can to endorse it as well. But I truly am honored to be able to be a part of what I call a justice movement, Justice for Renter. It's a movement for justice. And it's time for us to make that happen. So thank you for having me here. There's a lot that I could be talking about. Like, for example, I just came back from the Sanders Institute, the gathering in LA, and it was phenomenal. Jane Sanders, her institute, and the work that she's doing, and what she wanted to do was to bring a few elected officials and policymakers and grassroots organizers to this, to be able to talk about what she feels needs to be a national conversation, and that's our housing crisis, and not even our housing crisis, but what she calls a homelessness crisis. That it's gotten to a point where it has become a crisis, and it has to be addressed on a national scale. But coming to California, because we've got that on the ballot, we have to win in California, because if it loses in California, the most progressive state in the nation, we are going to be in big trouble if we allow the big developers and these corporations to win. So that's that. But so what I'm going to talk about specifically is our these low income housing developments. In September of last year, I took part in Berkeley at a rally in Berkeley for the tenants living at the Harriet Tubman senior apartments, right? And the seniors there, it was a beautiful thing. The seniors there were protesting the conditions of their apartment units and the treatments that they were getting from the owners and the managements of their low income housing. So foundation housing, you may have heard of them. But what I learned from that experience of standing in solidarity with these amazing seniors who are fighting for their rights and for justice, what I learned was that foundation housing is a for-profit player in in our affordable housing industry. And that nearly half of the affordable housing residents throughout the Bay Area nearly half have a profit-seeking landlord. So, companies like Foundation Housing, for example, they receive low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC support. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Excuse me just a second. Would everybody who is not a speaker please mute in consideration of our speakers? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sherry. So yeah, so these, for-profit landlords that are getting these tax credits, companies like Foundation Housing, they receive low-income housing tax credits. And so they were awarded federal tax credits to purchase properties to rehabilitate them. Okay, so the rehabilitation of Harriet Tubman, that Harriet Tubman Terrace, turned out to be a mess for the low-income seniors and those who are disabled, those disabled tenants there. But fortunately, the seniors organized and won their demand from the city of Berkeley to provide a tenant advocate for Harriet Tubman Terrace, so that they could be, they could communicate with the landlord. But so when it comes to tenant protections for renters living in properties owned by for-profit companies who are receiving these low-income housing tax credits, tenants tend to have fewer rights. They tend to have fewer protections than renters who are living under rent control or unsubsidized housing. We would think that they would have way more, but they don't, because they're, we're dealing with for-profit landlords who have purchased these low, affordable housing units. So although these LIHTCs, for short, although it's a federal program, I want to say that as a senator, as your next senator, I can propose reforms that would benefit tenants living in these tax credit places, or LIHTCs, by taking action through the legislative process and administratively through the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee. So there are things that we can do, right? We can close the loopholes in AB 1482. That's the law that caps statewide rent increases to 5% plus the rate of inflation, blah, 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 right? Or 10%. AB 1482 doesn't protect tenants living in these units. Isn't that something? So we can pass legislation limiting the rent increases in affordable housing units. The California Tax Credit Allocation Committee could impose limits on annual rent increases, as a condition of providing tax credits. We can empower tenants to organize as these beautiful elders in our community did. And it's allowed under our current state law. But in Berkeley, many activists on this call, many of you are right now getting signatures, right, to get on the November ballot, the tenant protection and right to organize measure that'll ensure Berkeley renters are able to organize. And then lastly, we can change state laws that make these LIHTC properties permanently affordable, as the law basically now only allows for a 55-year affordability restrictions. And it sounded like was that my little timer? Is that what that was?
Yeah, I forgot to start it at 5. So
all right, I can stop there. I can stop there. Thank you. And like I said, there's so much to discuss when we're talking about people's ability to have a place to live. But that's just a short 5-minute I wanted to focus on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jovanka. What we're going to do now, we're going to start. If you have a question for Jovanka, first of all, if you're one of the other panelists, we'd like to hear from you. And if time permitting, we'll take questions from anybody. So anybody else who's a panelist, if they would like to comment or ask a question of Jovanka, raise your hand. Okay, Leah.
Yeah, I thought maybe I wanted to dovetail and just kind of let folks know what, if we are able to collect enough signatures and get the new, kind of updates of Berkeley's ordinance, how it's going to address much of what, at least for Berkeley tenants who live in affordable housing. The change, for me, one of the big important changes in the ballot measure will make in Berkeley is that all tenants who live in affordable housing will be under the rent board. So, one of the reasons we had this situation at Harriet Tubman is that when they came to the rent board, we didn't have any jurisdiction over them. They couldn't do rent reductions for the habitability issues they were facing. And so I think that that's kind of an exciting thing that we can do. There's also 7 ballot measures around the state that are also collecting signatures that have similar language that will no longer allow these tax credits that are basically run by for-profit folks to be exempt. And so that means they'll be protected. So I think that that's a growing transition. I also wanted to just give an update, and I don't know, this just happened. But the state level, TCAC, did adopt a rent cap for tax credit properties, but the rent cap is obscenely high. It is, it's 5% plus CPI, which, is bad enough when that's all that people at the state level have. But when we're talking about people who are in tax credit properties, meaning that they are low income, that somehow that these new projects, so they're talking about projects in the future, that they'll be able to raise people's rents up to 10% each year, which is also, the Biden administration just passed that as well. So the solution is exactly what what many cities are doing, which is that you pass rent control that cover these properties, and you can lawfully do it. And so if you're not in a jurisdiction that's already done it, please do it. And it's one of the many reasons why all of these ballot measures across the state are really important this year.
Okay, could we have another hand up, please, of somebody who'd like to ask a question? First, we're going to take people that are other panelists. Is there another panelist? I don't see one. Okay, so we have a participant, Robert Bolano.
A for effort. Yeah, it's okay. My name has a ton of vowels, so yeah, it's all good. So also First off, sorry for grilling y'all on the AC Transit thing meeting a week or two ago, but yeah, thanks for listening to my concerns about that. And also, what can we do to further protect our mobile home residents as well? Because I know in San Leandro we've raised the rents on them by like over 20%. So that's another issue that I want to address.
That's a really good question, Robert, and you know, I think that's where us you know, being a unified front comes in. That's where, you know, it comes in. Maybe there's some other panelists who may be able to answer that question, but I do want you to know that I think that yes, Leah, we can pass rent stabilization ordinances, but I'm wondering if Robert is talking about just the fact that here in San Pablo, there were about two or three parks it was sold, and those people had to leave, and now, you know, they ended up building something on it that was not even housing. And so you know, I think that we do have to have laws that protect these types of housing, you know, the housing, right, is people who are living in sort of like these parks where they can, you know, park their trailers and such. It was really sad to see, because I have a friend who actually lived there, one of them, and the fact that it was able to be sold just like that, and with no concern or no care for where these people, you know, the people were going to go. I think it's something that we absolutely have to put our heads together to ensure that people have, you know, stability in their living environment. So maybe Alfred, did you want to help answer that question?
Absolutely.
All right.
There are a couple of state legislation proposed this year to close some of those loopholes. It's just like Leah mentioned that some state protections don't apply to this privately owned low-income housing. That loophole exists for mobile homes as well. But some state legislators have realized this, and they've introduced bills this year that you can ask our assembly member and state senator to support. One of these bills is called Assembly Bill 2778. And don't worry about remembering the numbers, I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
And this one would create a statewide rent cap on mobile home rent increases to, I think it's 3% plus inflation, or 5%, whichever is less. So something actually reasonable. And then the other one to address the issue that Jovanka mentioned in San Pablo of people closing and selling these mobile home parks. Our assembly member down in San Jose, Ashkara, has a bill that is, or actually no, this is a different assembly member, but there's a different bill called AB 2539. And this is called, similar to the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act that you may have heard of in Berkeley that's been proposed. This would be for mobile homes, where if the owner of a mobile home park wants to go out of business and sell, the people who live there would have the right to make the first offer, so that at least they get a chance to buy it. Those are some things that hopefully they can pass this year. If not, hopefully Jovanka can vote yes and get them through next year.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I had said 3 questions. We're gonna let Kate Harrison, if she can make a quick question.
Yeah, I'll be quick.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I want to thank you very much, Jovanka, and congratulations again.
Thank
There's beyond the rent issues, what we see in these below market rate buildings is real maltreatment of the tenants, in particular seniors. Senator Wahab had spoken with Leah and I last year about possible legislation to improve the conditions under which people live. Right now, these nonprofit so-called partners don't really run the building. They're run by the for-profits, and seniors have very little recourse. So I'm hoping to bring to you, when you're elected, the idea we had of making sure that the nonprofit has a substantive role in running the building, that they're not just a shell that allows the for-profit to get tax credits. So I wanted to mention that is another piece, because it's not just the rent issues, it's also the really poor treatment of the tenants in these buildings.
That's right,
impacting
Kate.
people.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for that. Yep, absolutely.
Thank you very
Look
much.
forward to working with you on that.
Okay, great. We're going to move on to our next panelist, Jovanka. Thank you so much for being here. I know it was difficult for you to get here today.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
our
you
next,
all. I got to get
thank you
going,
so
so thank
much.
you. Take care.
Okay, our next candidate, not candidate, our next speaker is Nikki Fortuna Boss. And she is also a candidate. Anyway, but she's going to be introduced by Richard Lee on the OREB board.
Thanks so much, guys. And sorry that my camera is off. I'm on the move a little bit right now, but super excited to be here with you all, and super excited that Nikki is here with us, of course. She's a name that resonates a lot in the progressive community in the East Bay. She's a current council member for Oakland's District 2 and a good friend of our Revolution East Bay. And as many of you know, she is running for supervisor in Alameda County's District 5 to replace outgoing Supervisor Keith Carson. We were really proud to endorse her candidacy back in February, and we're thrilled but not at all surprised that she had a really strong first place showing last month during the primary. So she will be going to the general in November, and we will, of course, be supporting her all the way there. We wanted to invite Nikki today because she's been a headstrong leader on housing and tenants' rights issues in Oakland and the wider Bay Area. As a candidate for supervisor, her priorities are what she calls the 3 H's: housing, homelessness, and healthcare, which, if you think about it, are 3 very interrelated issues that affect one another pretty closely. And so she's incredibly knowledgeable on this issue, and we're glad that she has the time this afternoon to join us on this call. So Nikki, thanks so much for being here, and I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that introduction, and thank you, Our Revolution, for continuing to work with me. I'm really happy to continue serving on the Oakland City Council as a council member for District 2 in Central Oakland and as council president, and also thrilled that I am moving forward to the general election to potentially join the Board of Supervisors. I'm going to focus a little bit more on Oakland, but happy to also talk about the county as well. I do want to first start by saying at the City of Oakland, we are really proud to have some of the strongest tenant protections in the state. And that is largely because we have a really strong partnership, myself, as well as Councilmember Fife and Councilmember Kolb. We have a strong partnership with tenants and tenant advocates, including ACE, Centro Legal, the Eviction Defense Center, the Oakland and Berkeley Tenants Union. And that makes a huge difference when we work together in partnership. So on the, up front, I just want to say that is really important for us being able to protect tenant rights and to expand tenant protections. Some of the things that we've been working on recently is implementing our rent registry. Oakland was a little late to the game relative to other cities in terms of adopting our rent registry, but that is being implemented. And we are working with our housing and community development staff to make sure that landlords are actually registering. We also are providing legal services to tenants through an allocation in our budget. And I do want to say briefly that some of you may have heard that Oakland is facing yet another budget deficit. Last year, working as council president, I helped to close a $360 million budget deficit in our general purpose fund. This year, it's $177 million. That is really serious. And the main message I have right now, as we are gathering information to think through some options for closing that gap, is making sure that we are collecting every single nickel and dime that we can to bring in revenue. So that includes our RAP fees, our rent adjustment program fees to make sure we're able to provide services to tenants. It also includes our business license tax. I worked to put onto the ballot in 2022, and the voters passed a progressive or tiered tax so that larger companies pay more. So we're really working to make sure that we collect all of that revenue, especially from landlords and big businesses, to help close our gap, and also to make sure that we're able to provide tenant services. Fortunately, our Housing and Community Development Department is largely funded by dedicated funds, not our general purpose fund. Nonetheless, it means we have to be really vigilant, making sure we can collect that revenue. And then I wanted to touch briefly on production and preservation, because those are really tied into how we protect tenants, how we create affordable housing, and ensure that tenants can be housing secure. On the production front, folks might remember that we put forward a bond measure for housing, affordable housing in 2022. We're really lucky that voters passed it, because we have $350 million in Oakland in bonds to put towards affordable housing. We issued that first tranche of funding some time ago, and the first project with those funds is breaking ground right now, and that is the really contested project at East 12th. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this project, but it was originally a luxury housing project that my predecessor on the council had approved. And when I got elected together with community, I really pushed back to make sure that that piece of city-owned land could be used for public good. And so I'm really happy to say that not only were we able to stop the luxury housing project with Urban Core, we were able to get 2 affordable housing developers to build 2 affordable housing projects that are 100% affordable. And the first has started construction, and we're doing a groundbreaking in April. So that's really good news. And the other project, which is done by Saha, they're doing 1 more session of community input. So if anyone's interested in that project and giving community input, I'll try to put that link into the chat. So production is really important. And then, of course, preservation. One of the things that I've been learning together with ACE and the Oakland Community Land Trust is that in places like Oakland with really old building stock, most of our rental housing, the vast majority of our rental housing, is these larger buildings that are, oops, my time is up. I'll just say briefly that preservation is a really important strategy, and Oakland is going to be continuing to expand our program with Measure U funds so that housing insecure tenants can organize and work with land trusts so that those homes can be permanently affordable and community owned. That's another important strategy. And I'm also working with ABAG to put a regional bond measure on the ballot so that we have more funds to create affordable housing, and some of those funds can also help to protect tenants. Thanks all.
Great. Good to hear from you, Nikki. Would anybody like to ask a question? Okay, Toni.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Sometimes I have problems with my microphone, that's why I'm asking. So, Nikki, I wanted to ask about the rent registry that you're establishing in Oakland. Is it going to be accessible to the general public, or like private and hidden only to city officials?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, it should be accessible, but I'll have to take a look and see if it's how accessible it is online through a public interface.
Okay, Raphael.
Hi, so the question I've got is basically, I just found some propaganda that the Apartment Association is putting out, basically talking about the impacts that this act would have if it passed. I was wondering if you folks have seen it and whether you have any comments on basically the points it will make. Basically, a lot of them are points you probably agree with, but with a more positive framing. There'll be more properties under rent control. There'll be rent control in more cities. There'll be vacancy control. There'll be a policy shift, and it will create adverse property values, yada, yada. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to that in the chat in case people are curious. But I figure it's good to know what propaganda the other side is putting out there, and wondering if people have counter arguments for it yet.
Those sound like all good reasons to pass these policies.
Thanks for sharing that,
Please raise
Raphael.
your hand if you want to make a comment. Alfred.
Sure. So I want to
Oh,
really
wait,
speak about
wait a
and how to
second.
counter the propaganda.
Excuse me, Alfred. I think Nikki was going to make a response.
Okay.
Sorry, Nikki.
Oh, no, that's fine. Go ahead, Alfred. I didn't speak directly to this, and so go ahead, Alfred.
Sure. So to answer this question of how to counter the landlord propaganda, one thing that they often try to claim is that rent control and tenant protections are economically inefficient and therefore end up making things more expensive in the long run. One message I found that really works to counter that is that if you think about the costs of people having to move or having to move too far from their job or from their communities or being evicted, those are really big costs that fall onto society. So if you hear the landlord saying, oh, tenant protections are inefficient, you can counter by saying the lack of tenant protections is even more inefficient.
Okay, thank you, Alfred. Do we have one more question for Nikki? Going once? Okay. I think nobody
Carol,
else
before
wants-
she leaves, I just want to congratulate her too from all of us on her
Yeah.
win, and we're looking forward to supporting you in the fall.
Thank you, Sherry and everyone. Good to be here.
Okay, thank you very much, Nikki. Okay, we're going to move on to the next speaker, and it's Aisha Wahab, and she's going to be introduced by Miss Sherry Johansson.
Okay, good. I've unmuted. Sometimes I'm not so good at that. We are so delighted to have Senator Aisha Wahab with us today. She is a state senator from District 10, which includes Hayward, Union City, Newark, Fremont, Sunnyvale, San Jose, Santa Clara, Milpitas, and I think all the unincorporated areas there. She has fought for injustice and hardship her whole entire life, beginning by being placed in the foster care system at a very young age. She entered public life as a city councilor in Hayward and ran to amplify the voices of renters and to build a community that everyone can afford a home. As a senator, she continues to work as an advocate and organizer for seniors, women, and children. In 2023, I think this is kind of important because you can talk all you want about the great things that we all want, but you need to get the job done. And in 2023, Senator Wahab was able to have 80% of her bills passed with bipartisan support and 30% with unanimous support from the Senate. So she's also somebody who can get the job done. She's dedicated to addressing the issues of housing affordability, civic engagement, education, and economic inequality. We are so delighted to have her join us today. Senator Wahab.
Thank you. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. So my name is Aisha Wahab. I'm the senator from District 10, which spans from roughly Hayward down to San Jose. My district is incredibly diverse. It's roughly considered 55% Asian. You know, for some people, they don't understand that the Asian is very different, very diverse in itself. I'm Asian. Nobody would think that, but it is what it is. And we have a very diverse socioeconomic background of our district. You know, I represent the city of Hayward, which is probably the least affluent city in my district, let alone the unincorporated parts. With the average family, when I first ran for Hayward City Council, was the median family income was about $65,000. That's a Bay Area city versus many other cities that I now represent that are well over six figures per median family income. So the disparity is incredibly great. And I want to highlight, because we are talking about housing, a couple of things. Number one, I am the only renter in the entire state Senate. Right? So when you ask why we don't have good rental policies and renters' rights and X, Y, and Z in regards to things like that, well, a lot of people haven't rented for decades, right? And I tell my colleagues all the time, renting isn't the way it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I break it down for them like this. For example, I'm a renter. I pay my rent, my utilities, my everything, right? Water, sewage, you name it, right? It's not that the landlord takes care of it. I pay it. Number two, I pay a monthly parking fee per vehicle. And I can't even get all my vehicles like, a dedicated parking spot monthly, right? And some people, it ranges from anywhere from $50 a month to $250 a month. Like, really think about that, okay? We pay not only the security deposit and a pet deposit if you have a pet, but now they've went even deeper and now you pay a monthly pet fee. Okay. So families that are renters can no longer have just a pet to love. They have to think of it as a monthly cost on top of their food and vet and much more, right? And if you take all of that and add it to either trying to save for a down payment, our growing elder population that many of us, are sandwiched in between taking care of our elders and also potentially starting our own families. And student loans and much more. There is no way a renter can get into the home ownership situation as easily as they did 30 years ago, right? If not even 40 years ago and so forth. And I highlight this because we're competing with cash offers. We are competing with business interests, purchasing single family homes. We are competing with a lack of transparency in the home ownership and rental markets. We are competing with the rights of businesses. Yes, I said that, rights of businesses. The fact that they have rights that supersedes renters is incredibly damaging to our community and society. So I say this all with the fact that I know several things were stated, but I am the only senator that has passed a social housing bill in the entire United States. SB 555 was signed by Governor Newsom this past October. It's called the Stable Affordable Housing Act. And it really creates 1.4 million. It plans for 1.4 million stable, affordable homes for California via public, nonprofit, and cooperative housing production. It's also the first law of its kind in the sense that it also tries to prevent, housing that's already naturally stable. So we have to talk about these things. I did push a bill, SB 466, last year to reform Costa-Hawkins. And it was quite a disappointment. We had 9 senators on the Senate floor. First off, it was washed down. Every rent bill goes through Senate Judiciary, which is just a bunch of lawyers. I'm just going to be honest. I asked to join it. I'm a part of it now. But it had 9 senators abstain, 16 vote no, and only 15 vote yes, right? And if you have roughly 25% of the Senate abstain because they don't want to be on the record, it's incredibly problematic. So we have a long way to go. And SB 395, a statewide rental database of terminations of tenancy and rent increases. The department said that was a $20 million price tag, which I don't believe. And again, people are fighting against transparency, accountability, and honestly, the rights of all of us as renters. So I'm happy to take any questions and answer what I can.
Well, I'm still reeling at you're the only person in the state Senate that is a renter.
Yeah.
Okay, Paula.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator Wahab, for being here. I have a question for you regarding, you just talked about how your effort to reform Costa-Hawkins failed because you had so many senators actually not vote, as I understood you. So can you share a little bit of your experience being a senator, what the lobbying is like in the offices by the apartment associations? Thank you.
It's not just the apartment association, it's literally every single housing group you can think of, right? So you have the apartment association, you have the realtors, you also have a lot of different developers, CBIA, and much more. It is not one group. They literally move as a block. I am their favorite person in the building, and they never visit my office, even though they talk about me the most. And they go door to door to door of every single senator and assembly members, even if the bill is still on the Senate side. And I'm very disappointed, to be completely frank with you all. I think COVID helped in some ways where the Senate was mostly on Zoom, and it was harder for lobbyists to lobby, right? But we as activists, it's incredibly hard for us to go every single day to a senator or assembly member's office and talk about the issues of why we care about this, right? Not only that, you all know how IEs work. They try to take out the person that is the most vocal on housing issues that are for the rights of people. And they also misinform folks. So I had a lot of senators that actually told me, Wahab, I really just want to let you know that this bill on policy is incredibly just, incredibly sound, incredibly fair, but on politics, I cannot support it. Right. And that is because they're running for different seats or they're running for re-election and so forth. And these were at least honest senators, right? And so for us, I just see how difficult it is to advocate in the state legislature compared to our local councils, right? I'm actually very glad that Costa-Hawkins is more of a local issue because, if a city wants it, they can still do it. When I first was on Hayward City Council, there was like maybe 16, 17 cities that had rent control or some type of rent stabilization ordinance. Now it's about 18, arguably 21. But we have a lot of work to do, and it's almost like an uphill battle. It's a David and Goliath story regarding anything. And if you look at all the bills that most electeds try to pass now, is about production. Production is not going to get our way out. Okay. We have to ensure that people stay housed for longer. People say rent control, people stay for years. That's called housing stability, right? So I'm very frustrated with the narrative, with a conversation. And I will say that there were so-called progressive members of the legislature that asked me to water down my bills, both the stable affordable housing bill, as well as Costa-Hawkins, as well as anything else. So it is disappointing to see who's really an ally on this issue and who's not. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Jovita?
Hi, Senator Wahab. Thank you so much for making time. I am a council person in Brentwood, California, and it's refreshing to hear you. And I would be supportive of any bill that actually guarantees low, very low, affordable housing. And I think my biggest issue right now with all the housing bills, because I get called a NIMBY. I'm not a NIMBY. I'm a YIMBY if you're really doing things for the people. I'm a NIMBY if you're only helping developers. So that's, I think there's like this conversation going on. But is there any appetite to actually start requiring, I would say a minimum of 20% affordable inclusionary housing in all four built to own and built to rent properties? Because I'm actually very disheartened by Buffy Wicks's latest bill. I think it's 1893, where on Builder's Remedy, she's reducing the affordable housing requirement from 20% in the last Builder's Remedy to now 10%. And while I don't like Builder's Remedy because it takes away our rights as a city to be able to do what we want, at least I got 20%, right? Now I'm not even getting that. So is there any conversation up in Sacramento on that? And then I will be lobbying as a member of the Latino caucus. What can I, as a member of the Latino caucus, make people understand that in the 70s, 80s, my people who build the houses used to be able to buy them. Now we can't even buy them anymore, and we're the ones breaking our backs. My father was a roofer, so what can we do with all of that stuff, right? The people that are building them not being able to buy them, and then the reduction of the inclusionary affordable housing from 20 to 10% on Buffy Wicks's latest bill.
Definitely. I'm not familiar with Buffy's bill until it comes to the Senate side. So I'm going to pause right there just on her bill. But you know, as a member of the Housing Committee, I'm very, very focused on making sure that we prioritize affordability to renters, right? I think renters have the shortest end of the stick, period, across the board. And I say this as a person whose family home was foreclosed on during the Great Recession and has been a renter since. And I see no end in sight for me as to, could I potentially own a home, right? Unless I get like a wad of cash falls on top of me, or like literally every family member puts in some money or something like that. But it's incredibly difficult. I will say a couple of things. One, we don't hear enough from local city council members, right? So there are large groups and coalitions and so forth. And I want to be very clear, even the term YIMBY and NIMBY, that's a divide and conquer mentality, right? YIMBY, to be completely frank with you all, there are a lot of people that call themselves YIMBYs, and it's only focused on production, right? Only focused on the developers, you know, meeting their goals, right?
And missing middle, not even for poor
Yes.
people. It's a missing middle conversation.
100%, right? And I fully see that. And yet there are these groups that are getting more and more powerful, more and more influential, and people are just hearing the YIMBY commentary, right? Not necessarily actually understanding each bill as it stands on its own. So I think that that's problematic. I also think that, you know, we as advocates, as well as people who really focus on housing and working people's issues, we don't prioritize enough which bills. It's almost like a shotgun shot where it's spread out as to like, there's too many bills, too many focuses, too many things going on, including ballot measures, including re-elections, including everything that, you know, politics plays into it, rather than, okay, this is the one bill that us as a coalition are all going to focus on. So here's the umbrella agenda, right, of what we all want. And here's the first domino that we are all going to support. And SB 555 had like nearly, I don't know how many dozens of orgs that were backing it, right? We still had to make amendments and so forth to make it, you know, really tangible. So I think that we need to kind of focus, right, a little bit more as to what is it that we want, whether it's giving cities more rights, giving benefits, where cities can say, we want X, Y, and Z. The problem with the affordable housing percentage, cities are opposed to it. Like, talk to your city managers.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah,
Give me
but talk to
20.
your
I will
city
do 20
managers, right?
across the board.
Talk to your staff. I'm going to say this right now, and I've said it a million times. Cities are inherently having a conflict of interest when they want higher property costs to generate a higher property tax revenue. So they don't actually care about affordable housing. They really don't. And that's why you have these onesie, twosie little things of like maybe 10 units here, 5 units there, 7 units and things like that, because they really don't want that. They want the higher income individuals to come into their cities, which I understand, but it's a disservice. We need mixed income housing in every single development that is being developed. My personal opinion.
Well, if you write a bill for that, let me know and I will come out and I will lobby for you and support you 110%.
Thank you so much. Last question by Toni Grimm, please.
Hi, I was just going to make a comment about the lobbying against repealing or reforming Costa-Hawkins, the difficulties, you know, with the well-funded landlord groups, property investors and property managers. Don't forget that one of the biggest people who killed the bill, the Prop 10 last time, was our own Democratic governor, who filmed, you know, ads saying don't vote for repeal or reform of Costa-Hawkins. So when you have the leader of the party, the Democratic Party in California, doing that, then it's no wonder that all of the senators, no matter what they're, you know, the Democratic senators and members in the assembly fall in line.
Yeah, I'm going to say I fully agree. I fully understand. And, you know, not everyone that's elected is a renter or experienced that. So it's quite disappointing. I will say that, having these conversations.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for being with us. And we are all so delighted for all of the things that you're doing for the renters. And I do think it's just awful that you're the only senator. That's unbelievable.
Yeah,
So thank you. so much.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you. And again, I'll ask Ruskell to put in his email address if you guys want to have a conversation or meet anytime in the future. Again, thank you guys for hosting me.
Okay,
Yep.
our next guest, Toni Grimm, is going to be introduced by Sherry.
Get 2 in a row. Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Well, for those of you who don't know, I started my journey in California in Alameda. I moved to Alameda from Santa Fe, New Mexico. And one of the first people that I met as a renter was Toni Grimm. I would characterize Toni as a war buddy. I think that's what you call somebody who's always fought by your side in the trenches and always has your back. We tabled together and canvassed together for Bernie Sanders for both elections. We fought tooth and nail to get tenant-friendly city council, and she was one of the key organizers on our No 1K campaign, which was denying the money groups again of landlords and developers the opportunity to cement into an unfair rental ordinance into the Alameda city charter. Right now, unfortunately, Alameda is facing increasing pushback from the same moneyed interests that we beat before. I'm sure Toni must feel like it's sort of a whack-a-mole. No matter how hard we work, they seem to keep on coming back. So, Toni, we'd like to be updated on what's happening in Alameda and kind of some of the problems that the renters are facing in Alameda.
Okay, well, first of all, my experience is only on the private market renters, as I don't really have any experience with these the low-income housing and the projects, so I can only speak on the private market. And in Alameda, we were kind of late to the game of getting. Sorry, we were late to the game of getting rent control. We got rent control in September 2019. And we got it was pretty good, 70% of the increase in CPI with a cap of 5%. So we were kind of happy with that. We weren't very happy with the banking that was added to it. So less than a year later, during the summer of 2020, even during COVID, we so-called stakeholders got called into to talk with city staff about a proposed capital improvement plan that the city was just hell-bent on putting in. And since then, we've been fighting it. And it's come to the council several times. We got it beaten back and beaten back. We've been lobbying and lobbying against it. But unfortunately, finally, we lost the battle last December when the city council in Alameda did vote to put in a capital improvement plan. And the reason that I am this is for rental property. The reason that I am so opposed to this is that capital improvement plans completely undermine rent control. They are a loophole to get around rent control, because what they do is force a tenant to make an additional payment in addition to rent, and they call it a pass-through. Now, you know, if you're a renter, it doesn't matter what you have to pay to your landlord determines your whole lifestyle. It determines what percentage of your income you're paying to be able to stay in your premises and not have to leave, not to get priced out. And it doesn't matter if you call it rent, or if you call it rent and a pass-through, rent and a surcharge, rent and whatever, blah, blah. It's still the amount of money that you have to pay to be able to stay in your home. And recently, the survey of people in Alameda, about 45% of renters are severely burdened, paying more than 30% of their income on rent. And this is before we got the capital improvement. And a certain percentage of that, I think about a third, are severely rented, paying more than 50% of their income on rent. So we want to talk about, you know, we've been very successful, I think, throughout California in the fight to get no cause evictions ended, pretty much. But now we have this self-eviction of being priced out. And so capital improvement makes a mockery of our rent control laws, because we had I told you we had 5% in Alameda. Now you can add, they weren't even going to have any cap on the capital improvement plan, but we've been with our lobbying, we were able to get it set at an additional 3%. So basically it changes the cap, which was there under rent control of 5%. It changes it to 8%. Okay, and by the way, capital improvement, if those of you aren't familiar with it, I know you are in Berkeley and in Oakland, but if you haven't thought about it before, it is defined as an improvement in property that materially adds to the value of the property. Okay, so who owns the property? The landlord. So adding to his value, which increases his equity, the renters are forced to pay for that, and they get no equity themselves. And it started out when we were talking with the city, they were going to have 100% pass through to the tenants, and we were able to lobbying over that over the last 3 years. We came up with this convoluted thing they passed in December, based on the idea of what they imagine a mom and pop landlord to be, and they have this ridiculous formula now. 2 to 4 unit properties will get 100% pass through, because those are supposed to be owned by the small landlords. Never mind how many of those properties a landlord owns and how many cities they own a property like that. But just because of that, if you live in a 2 to 4 unit building, you will get 100% of a pass through, in addition to your annual rent increase. 5 to 15 units will get a 75% pass through. 16 to 25 units will get a 50% pass through. Don't ask me why. And then the 25 unit buildings will get no pass through at all. And that was one of our successes that we were able to do in lobbying, because we had a bunch of people with one of these. Sorry, is that time up? Is that time up?
You have a little bit longer. Tony, go ahead and finish your thoughts.
We had a group, we activated people in a big monster apartment building owned by Blackport or whatever they are called. And we were able to get the council to agree that the owner of that building, who had $1 million profits even during COVID, was really able to pay for improvements himself. And I want to mention something, that in our city, this is a landlord is a businessman. And this is the only group of businessmen that are getting improvements to their properties, their business expenses subsidized, in addition to being guaranteed a fair return on rent. And so it is just the status that landlords have, as the property owners have, is just completely different from any other business owner. And I think it's very unfair. And so I am interested in going forward. The only way we lost this in Alameda, I am interested in getting together with the other cities that have rent control and capital improvement, which would be Berkeley, I know, and Oakland, and also San Francisco, and getting together all of us and trying to fight capital improvement on a statewide level. So if anybody is interested in doing that, then please put something in the chat for me. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Toni. I understand the passion, because I was there with you, and there's nothing worse than living month to month, not knowing how much you're going to have to pay for shelter. So we have some hands up. First is our co-chair, Susanna. Susanna.
Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, Toni. Okay, I just need a clarification. I have not been a renter for 25 years, and I've been focused on Medicare for all and stopping a genocide. So I am not up to date on rent, like all the rental rules, but just answer this. Okay, so a landlord, I'm renting a place from a landlord, and a landlord decides to put a new roof on, remodel the joint, whatever. They can literally pass those costs along to their tenants.
Yes, in addition to getting a rent increase every year.
Right.
In addition to getting your rent increase, that is taken out. Those landlord expenses are removed from the whole idea of rent increase, because they don't call it rent. They call it a pass-through. Therefore, it's not subject to any of the rent increase regulations. And one of the other things about it too is you can't appeal it. You know, it's just the landlord, it's decided by our rent program board. And I guess you can appeal it at some point, but they already figure out what amount they're going to let the landlord, you know, the amount of money that they're going to do. One thing that we did get, we were able to get a hardship exemption, which we think will help some people a lot. But yes, basically, yes. All of those
insane.
expenses are taken out of the rent control law and added on to your rent.
Yeah, that used to be your cost of doing business as a landlord, as a property owner. That is absolute insanity. Okay, yeah, I guess I obviously need to tune a little bit more to
20 or
this.
30 years too. Amortize out for 20 or 30 years, right? So whoopee, you know, there goes rent control.
Yeah, no, it actually backdoor circumvents, whatever you want to call it, any rent control whatsoever. And it's pretty damn unconscionable if you ask for it. That tenant is not getting one iota of benefit from that landlord's property values going up. Other than maybe their bathroom doesn't leak anymore because the landlord like renovated it. But that used to be, I've been a landlord, albeit for 2 years, and I will never do that again. We sold that house. It was horrible, but we like completely redid a bathroom because it leaked and would have never even thought of charging our tenants a dime for that. And I mean, that was 20-ish years ago. So anyway, okay, well, thank you for clarifying that. I am horrified. Okay, this whole entire panel is sort of horrifying me. This is really bad. Okay,
Tony,
on.
Leah has a question or a comment.
Yeah, sorry to be the, I just wanted to give some additional information for folks. I mean, I think one thing that's important is that there are cities like Alameda that the way they deal with capital improvements is that there's a direct pass through. Part of the solution is that a landlord only can increase the rent beyond just the annual rent increase when they can show that they're not making a reasonable return on investment and that capital improvements are only a factor. Once you do that, it makes it almost impossible for them to justify passing on these costs. And so I think one of the things that the city of Alameda needs to do and you know, and other cities that have passed rent control, but most of the new ordinances are set up that way so that it's a factor test, which is similar to the way, you know, I think we keep saying Berkeley does it. But it is, I mean, this is something that Blackstone actually brought to European countries when they started buying up their social housing. And countries like Denmark literally changed their laws so that you had to own properties. You basically could do capital improvements and had to wait 5 years before you could petition. And most of them weren't even owning the properties that long because they would buy them, then do these capital improvements to jack up rents, and then they were selling them. But the way we can do it and the way we do it in California is, again, you don't allow just for straight pass-throughs on capital improvements. Instead, it's part of what's called a reasonable return on investment petition. And then that, and just so you know, the Concord ordinance, that's the way you do it. So yay, Concord. But if Concord can do it, I think everybody can. So I think that's it. I mean, what's nice is so many of these policy things do have solutions that we're already doing in other places. But I also just want to remind folks, I know many people saw it during the pandemic, but there was a film called Push, which is done by Leilani Farha, that was about exactly this, that they use capital improvements. And also in San Francisco, they had to restructure their capital improvements. So anyway.
But I have a question about the reasonable rate of return. What if a landlord is already getting a reasonable rate of return? Does that
raise the rent?
That would not be allowed? The rent increase would not be allowed?
Yeah. Well, beyond the you know, beyond the annual rent increase that's allowed in your area, you know, so in Berkeley, it's 60% of CPI. I mean, every community is different, but not every community. But so you have your annual amount. But if they're saying, look, that annual amount that you've determined is basically inflation for everybody, in my particular situation, it's not enough for me to continue to get a reasonable return on my investment. So I need an increase. So then they have to justify that. And one of the things they can use to justify it is that they've had to do these improvements. And as Mark is reminding us, that if the landlord is doing repairs because they haven't been maintaining it, then you can say, no, you can't count that. So there really is a way to address it. And I mean, this goes back to, tenant power, right? Alameda had strong council where they were doing good policy, and, we lost that. I mean, you can tell, like, we're all kind of ebb and flowing on the tenant power in your different communities. And so these policies we can put them in place when we have that tenant power, and it's harder when we don't.
Thank you, Leah. Kate, you have a question for Toni? Or a comment?
Yeah, Toni, or I was going to actually make a suggestion. Senator Wahab asked, what could we all row together on? And I think the most important thing is the statewide rent registry. And why I say that is it's what made possible our vacancy tax. It's what makes possible understanding these kind of costs. And this whole rhetoric about how single family homes are sacred because they're owned by people, when we know that's not true, and we can see the corporate ownership, we only know that because of rent registry. So the first thing that we did 2 years before we passed the vacancy tax was get a rent registry for all buildings. Without that, you're sort of hampered because you don't have the data. So I would really sort of encourage all of us to think of that as the next necessary step, either statewide or city by city. Thank you.
Yeah, you know what? On the rent registry idea, I've always been in favor of that. And it really bothers me that as renters, we get vetted. We have to give all this information about ourselves, where we have lived, how much we make, our whole living history. And we don't know anything about our landlords. They don't have to give the same information to us. We don't know how wealthy they are. Do they own 15 million other buildings? Are they just a building mom and pop, just barely scraping by? And so we don't know, and we don't know what their past history is with their renters either. When we were looking at the places to rent, we don't know any of that. It's just been a complete imbalance between the information that a renter is allowed to have and that landlords are required to us to give them. So I'm really in favor of that idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Toni. And as I said, she's a real fighter for our revolution ideas, and she's not just doesn't talk about stuff. She's been working in the trenches. So Carol, back to you.
Okay, I thought there was one other hand up. Julia, is Julia Cato still want to speak? Yeah, her hand is up. Julia, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to give a little historical input. At one time in the early 90s, there was an actual landlord majority on the rent board. And during that time, my landlord put on a new roof on our building, which we paid $100 a month for a number of years, extra rent, until it was finally paid off. And then that extra $100 was removed. So thanks to the rent board getting a progressive majority for the rest of the time, that particular ploy has been prevented ever since. But it happened here as well. That's all.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, now back to Carol.
Okay, the next person that's going to speak is Laura Nakamura, and Susanna from our board is going to introduce her.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, so I think I first met Laura during the early on Verdi years, 2015, 2016. We were all part of the original group with Our Revolution Contra Costa, which has since merged with Our Revolution East Bay to make us even bigger and stronger. So she was my cohort, my colleague in the fight for Medicare for all, the fight to change this country. And she is very, very involved in her local community in Concord. And she's part of the, what's the bike thing? I wrote it down. Bike Concord. I know, it's like Bike Concord. I just met this amazing guy who started Bike Concord the other day. Concord Community Alliance, where she was a huge leader in a fight to stop a horrific Bay Area developer, Sino. I'm sure y'all have heard of him. On his quest to take over the world, or at least the East Bay. So I am super, super proud to be in the trenches, was thrilled when she ran for Concord City Council and won, yay, won like strike for progressiveness there. And she's doing amazing things on that city council. She has our backs every single step of the way. And she's going to tell us about something that's happening out there that we all need to know about and we need to help her with. So, Laura, you have the floor.
Wow, Susanna, thank you so much. So hi everyone, I'm Laura Nakamura. I was elected in November of 2022. And my last 18 months have been nothing but heavy lifting of issues for people, the working families in Concord. Susanna mentioned the developer selection process with a huge development known as the Concord Naval Weapons Station, where we now have a new developer and we're moving forward. But the other thing is that I want to say thank you to so many people on this call who have actually laid the groundwork and done a lot of the work with regards to tenant protections and rent stabilization and just cause for eviction. But there's also that component that was really important in Concord about the tenant power and the buildup to that really helped us to get where we are at right now. We've had 8 years of tenants really sharing their stories and speaking at city council meetings. So much so that when the state of California, when it was time to do our housing element, we had documentation about displacement from Concord. And we ended up putting a commitment to rent stabilization and just cause for eviction in our housing element as an anti-displacement measure, because that was what the state of California said we had a problem with. So in early 2023, on the heels of being elected, I was a third vote for doing that, putting this tenant protection into our housing element. We were supposed to finish that up by the end of 2023. Here we are in 2024. The timing, things got delayed, but on March 5th, we did vote in a 4-1 that for a very strong rent stabilization and just cause for eviction ordinance. I want to see this all be normalized in California. I want to see cities all across California doing this. But it's really hard when 3 days later, after we do something really strong and big, that we've got people who have now filed for a potential referendum. And so we are facing a potential referendum in Concord. Opponents to the tenant ordinance have until April 18th to collect 7,204 signatures to either bring it back to the city council to repeal the ordinance or to put it on the ballot in November. And I'm really hoping that that doesn't come to fruition. So what I am doing right now is everything I can to reach out to people and let them know what's happening in Concord, making sure that people are aware of what's at stake, because putting this on the ballot, most people instantly know what the moneyed interests will do with this. I have already gone to the DPCCC, the Democratic Party in Contra Costa County, with a resolution. The Issues Committee voted unanimously about a week or two ago. 15 people supported my resolution for the Democratic Party to support the ordinance that we had adopted. And what else can I tell you? I'm going to come up for air right now, but I guess one other thing I should say is in Concord, 50,000 people are tenants, and that is why this is such a big deal for me in Concord.
Thank you, Laura. Wow, 50,000 renters. That's like huge. That's a large number. And this is like really worrisome. It's like now it's become way too easy to like just repeal and get good people kicked out of office, go grab a bunch of signatures, lie about it. And we've had this happen time and time again. So this is very disturbing. And I'm part of that DPCCC group. So trust me, I will be mustering all the votes for that to pass on a couple of weeks from now. Hey, Raphael, you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a question. So you said you managed to get rent stabilization and just cause protections passed in Concord. I know that in Pinole, we tried to sort of start a discussion on that a few months back, and they're basically the landlord said, "Oh, nobody's really getting evicted unjustly. There's no evidence, so there's no need to really do anything about it right now." We didn't have anybody there that could really push back. So how do you sort of build the baseline to get the process started?
That's a great question. Tenants really started organizing there was a Raise the Roof coalition of community organizations that started raising awareness about 8 years ago. And I'll tell you that Susanna mentioned my connection to Bike East Bay and Bike Concord. Back in 2016, I was happily riding along on my bicycle going back and forth to work. When someone pointed out that bike lanes could be connected to gentrification in my neighborhood as an amenity. We all need that access to safe roadways, but I did some research and found out that actually could be true in certain communities, and that got me kind of off my bike and ready to kind of figure out what I could do to support tenants. It has been 8 years, Raphael, of people coming to the city council, very slowly chipping away at how we can protect tenants with an anti-harassment ordinance that was done in, I think, 2019, may have been 2021. There's all sorts of things that have really been building until to this moment. And it was November 2022 when I was elected by the voters that really became a change moment for us to be able to have the support on the council.
Thank you, Laura. Oh, Toni has her hand up. Toni, you have a question for Laura?
Oh, no, I was just going to answer the person asking about how to start at the beginning, to get renters advocacy groups. Not just, when you have the people coming to city council, you obviously take those names down and connect with them and form your own little group. But another thing you can do, I don't know how many apartment buildings are in your city. I think you said Pinole, but you can start door knocking. You can door knock on the large apartment buildings too. And all you need to do usually is get one person in an apartment building to agree to meet with you, and then they can spread the word throughout their apartment building. And sometimes the people who were speaking at the city council meetings that you're talking about might be that one person in a big apartment building. So you just have to build it little bit by little bit, just one ingredient at a time. And if it's a real issue, people care about it, it'll go fast.
And that's also what seems to have happened kind of organically in Concord. Todos Santos Tenants Union was the result of, 26 families being evicted from one building. And so there are moments where that stuff really will generate the momentum for people coming together to see how they can fight this. But it's like, as Toni said, is that you just want to find one person, then another person, then another person. Tenants don't like to talk and talk up and speak out against their landlords because they're afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that there are some tenant associations in Pinole. I know that I help out with the Pinole Grove Resident Action Association over in the Pinole Grove Senior Housing, and they're working on, the recent rent increases there and some issues with harassment, like you mentioned with the Concord's anti-harassment ordinance. But there's also a lot of other apartment buildings in, Pinole that don't have tenant associations, as far as I know. From what they've told me, according to ACE, it's basically them and maybe one other tenant organization in West County. But so, yeah.
Thanks, Toni. Thanks, Raphael. And I will just put my 2 cents in here about knocking on doors. It is really a valuable tool because someone knocked on my door when I first moved to where I live now and told me about what a property developer, a really bad one, was wanting to do in my neighborhood. And that spurred me to bundle my pajama-clad child and my husband up and hit the city council meeting that was happening in an hour and protest. And that led to a group of us with, I think we had like $5,000 we managed to cobble together. And we beat a developer who spent over $1 million fighting us So knocking on that door started a whole movement, and that was the first time I ever really got anything involved in my community. So do not discount that knock on that one door, because it can really set the ball rolling. We have time for one more question, because Laura, you were really succinct. Alana.
Great, Laura, thank you so much. You are such an inspiration. This is Ilana Auerbach from Berkeley. And I'm wondering, it's a little off topic, but once you got off your bike, Laura, and because you thought, okay, gentrification is linked to putting in bike lanes, and then you started working for tenants, which is so wonderful. Is there anything that you can say more about that? This is the first time I've heard that. I just want to be, educated and hear anything, if there are other studies or anything that you know about the link between gentrification and bike lanes.
Yeah, I don't have anything right at my fingertips, but when someone mentioned that to me, I did do a quick deep dive and was able to come up with enough articles that pointed to that could happen in certain neighborhoods. And what I want in my city is I want to be able to mitigate any of that displacement before we go. I mean, I love bike lanes, but bike lanes without displacement. And so we have to mitigate that first before we keep moving on. And we're still working on the bike lanes. We've got a very good bike and pedestrian plan in the city. But it's one of those things that even in the city of Concord, there was an opportunity for improvements at a park. And the city needed a neighborhood or a community organization to partner together with the city to get a grant. And the tenants were like, no, we don't want a nicer park. I mean, we do, but we know what that means for our rents. And so they fought against it. They fought against a nicer park in their neighborhood because it would have impacted their rent prices.
Wow.
Yeah,
Crazy.
that was pretty powerful to hear that.
Wow. I gotta tell you, I'm getting a major education here today. Seriously, I have just not played in the housing space, and wow, a lot of great things going on, a lot of amazing people. Laura, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for letting us know what's happening. I think all of you probably know that I'm in Contra Costa County too, and also involved with Fortunato, the Democratic Party out there. It has its moments. But yeah, so thank you so much for being here, and thanks for all the great questions. And back to you, Carol.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Hey, this is great. I can't believe what I've learned. There's so much going on for renters, and there's so much more to do. The next person we're going to hear from is Leah, Simon-Weisberg, and Mark Van Landet from our board is going to introduce Leah.
Well, I just want to piggyback on what Susanna said. It's so important to get these great champions of working people into positions of power. That opens the door. And then after that, the organizing doesn't stop. We have to educate ourselves, educate others, and mobilize for all of these issues. So that's always ahead of us. It is a pleasure. It is a pleasure to introduce our next speaker. You've heard from her earlier. You've got the measure of her expertise. She is a tireless advocate for tenants. I've known and respected her as a policy thinker and doer. She is a co-creator for Alameda County's anti-displacement programs, a real leader on rent control, just cause. She has been long time associated with our friends at ACE. I can think of nobody better to discuss housing and tenants' rights in the East Bay than her. She is the chair of the Berkeley Rent Board. She is Leah Simon-Weisberg. Leah.
Wow, that's like a birthday present. I have to say this has really been interesting, and to have, so many great thinkers. I really just really appreciate having been invited to this. What's exciting is that this is happening in so many jurisdictions. I think for folks, I know Kate, you were involved when getting many of the original ordinances passed, and Mark, Janowitz was one of the early commissioners for the rent board, and Julia, you're one of the first members of the Berkeley Tenants Union. I apparently, as a baby, was at one of the early meetings, so there you go. But I think that so that's just really exciting to have, to have this happen. I mean, only in 2015, there was nobody talking about this. I mean, to have electeds worrying about referendums of ordinances being passed, it's pretty damn amazing. But there's still so much that we have to keep doing. And I think, when I was asked to come and speak, I wasn't sure, I can't quite remember if it's about the demolition ordinance or it's about the ballot measure you wanted me to talk about, Carol. Can you remind
You
me?
can speak about both of them if you'd like.
All right, well, I think I already I used some of the time earlier talking about how this ballot measure in Berkeley will protect tenants who live in these tax credit properties. And we see a lot of seniors who are in these. And so when you think about the abuse, and Kate Harrison talked about, this is not only about people's rents being raised or not getting the repairs they need, but also just generally, the abusive and hostile environment that they're living in, and really having no ability to move because they're only able to stay housed because they have this affordable units. So I think it's a really important change that'll happen in Berkeley. And the other big piece of it is going to be this right to housing. No, sorry, right to organize. And what we're talking about is that, and this was has already been initiated and is happening in San Francisco. And so Berkeley would be the second city to take this on, but has the right to demand that the landlords negotiate in good faith over terms of the tenancy. And so what we're talking about is that, much of what we can do when we talk about rent increases or how you can be evicted or not, these are all things kind of once the tenancy is created. But what tenants still continue to have no influence over is the terms, right? And that contract that's like these days can be up to like 94 pages, with in such a print that you've got to have like fancy readers on to be able to understand it. And that's because we have no bargaining power. And in the same way, workers have learned that by being in a union and having a labor contract can create a kind of stability in the workplace and, a safer environment. We're hoping to apply some of that in the tenant context. So I'm really excited and hope that it will lead to a situation where we have a much better lease that tenancies are controlled by. So it should be good. There's some other pieces around how you can be evicted that, let's be honest, Oakland's ordinance right now is the best. But there's lots of great pieces in there. And because Berkeley's ordinance is only through the ballot, we've got to go back to the ballot to strengthen those ordinances. And remember that because, as we've all been saying, folks who've been in the trenches for many, many years, whether it's on this issue or labor issues or immigrant rights, the other side is in some ways just as smart as us, and they got a lot more money. And so they're constantly coming up with new loopholes and new ways to be abusive. And so we have to constantly update our ordinances to reflect the latest game. So Berkeley needs to do that, but these are important. Another really important piece is, as we know, many of us are struggling with this, issue that, we need more units. I still feel that is up to debate. I don't necessarily agree with that. I do know that we need more units that are affordable to our communities. But what's happening is we are constantly having to fight against folks trying to build more and also doing infill. But, rent control units often have targets on their back, because if you buy a rent controlled building, you tear it down and then you build, you tear down 10 units and you build 70, obviously that's a huge, huge money maker. But we want to protect tenants. And in this environment where we've got, if you hopefully are lucky like Berkeley, where you have a strong inclusionary unit policy, so you're getting 20% of those units are affordable, and if you don't lose the rent controlled unit. So another thing that are kind of these two issues coming together, where you've got, we have a demolition ordinance. If you're hearing it from the outside, it sounds strange that we're advocating for a demolition ordinance. It sounds like we're fighting to demolish. But what we're trying to do is actually control the demolition, because with all of these you know, you can build whatever you want, laws that the state keeps forcing on us, one of the things local communities still get to control is demolition. And so it's through that demolition ordinance. And I have to say, Berkeley has been doing this for a long time, where they basically said no demolitions. Then there was some bad case law, and we had to liberalize it a little bit by force. But essentially, the new version of it is, and this has helped with some of the state laws. And I think I just want to encourage everybody to really dig in to how all these pieces work together, because so few people understand it. So we're kind of losing perspective. I see my time is up. Let me just say one more sentence. The main key thing is 1 for 1. So if you are demolishing units owned by, or that where tenants are living, or low income tenants, or it's rent controlled, you have to replace a 1 for 1. And the other piece is that the tenants have a right to return. And that piece, Berkeley is one of the fewest. I mean, I don't know if there are any other cities that require that those individual tenants have the right to return, and the landlords have to pay for the difference. Like when they go find housing, the landlords have to pay the difference.
Thank you, Leah, for that overview. Appreciate it very much. We're going to go to questions, and Sherry's going to ask the first question. I'm glad people have questions because I'm not smart enough to ask questions about this. So, Sherry, go ahead.
I don't believe that, Mark. Leah, again, I'm kind of invested in the city of Alameda, and basically to meet the state requirements, they have built a bleep amount of kind of ugly apartments on the old base. And I totally agree with you that it's not just how many, it's not the number, it's the quality. Could you speak to a little bit of how we create community or maintain community, a sense of families, when we sort of stick all of these housing kind of in a, you know, it's not, I wouldn't call it a ghetto because it's very beautiful, but kind of stick them away where they're not part of the rest of the community.
You mean in terms of affordable housing?
All of it, even these are, some of these are very expensive housing. They're also affordable, but they're all stuck without a community.
I'm the person who is the all-knowing on that question. I mean, I think it comes back to community organizing, right? You know, and it's about creating, you know, I've been having conversations, and Kate and I got to have breakfast this morning, and one of the things, you know, I kept thinking was about how it does feel very lonely, and that there's lots of toxicity and all of these things. And I have to say, this has kind of been magical. And I have to say, this is one of the most fun Zooms I've ever been on, you know, in terms of like lots of thoughtful discussion. And I think this is creating that community. And, you know, I think, you know, I still have one of my favorite pictures, there was a picnic in Alameda, just celebrating after rent control had passed. And, you know, that kind of stuff is super powerful. And I think we need to, you know, do more picnics.
That's the great answer. We need more picnics. And I think we can all hold that to ourselves. Council member from Brentwood, Jovita, go ahead.
I just want to say, Leah, you said that word, it feels very lonely. And I'm going to tell you all out there, if you're not an elected, being an elected is lonely. And like Leah, this is a great call for me to be on. Susanna hears the constant attacks. And one thing as an elected, I would say, is when you show up to city council meetings with your voices, you have no idea what that does for us. You really don't. Because I can be up there sitting and fighting for whatever my causes are, like oil and gas or housing or whatever it is. But when you're not there, it's a very lonely place. But when you're there, the tide really turns. So my one ask is that you might not be in our cities, but I think we need to find a way to support each other. And when you need a call to action as a council person, or you need a call to action as an activist, we really need to be there to support each other, even if we don't live in those cities. Because even though I live in Brentwood now, I'm East Oakland born and raised, and I will always do everything to support the East Bay as much as I can. So I think that we probably need to find a way to have those calls to action to show up at council meetings, because you all have no idea the power that that has. Your voices are so strong. So Leah, thank you so much for saying that, because it does get lonely. There are nights after meetings I go home and cry, I will be honest. So I appreciate you using those words.
Thank you, council member. Toni, go ahead.
Now, I'd like to see a definition agreed upon by everybody in the that wants to build more housing as to what the word affordable means. Seems to me it's a buzzword to make people feel good that just says, oh, something below market rate. But what's the correlation to the real word affording? How many people who live in your community, say Berkeley, what are they earning? And does affordable mean that they're not supposed to have to pay over 30% of their income on rent? Or does it just mean that they pay, what does it mean? And then instead we look at the price of the unit to call it affordable. We should be looking at the occupants that are going to be moving into it to say that if it's affordable or not. Because right now it's just, you know, it just rings hollow to me when people say affordable housing. I can't get excited about it because then I look at the prices of it and it isn't affordable to me or anybody else that I know, you know. So I would just like that we could zero in on that and define that more clearly.
Would you agree that accessible would be a better term than affordable? We go through the same thing with healthcare, right? They're like, oh, well, it's available.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's available if you have buku bucks, but the same thing, right?
Well, accessible kind of is talking about disability access too, like when you talk about that, you know, but it's realistically affordable. And it's being used as a buzzword by people who are even want to build more housing, putting out these proposals. Look how wonderful, we have X percentage of affordable housing. But what does that really mean? I mean, who can move into it?
Right.
Leah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, when I want to talk about kind of it's what is it, the housing that we need? And, you know, it goes back to not being about profit-driven solutions. And, you know, I mean, it's, you know, yes, I mean, I think it's an easy answer to say it should be very, very low. But the bottom line is nobody should be paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And so it's the government's job to step up and create the housing that people can afford, paying 30% of their income. And so, I mean, I'm a fan of, I mean, I don't think there should be a single for-profit entity involved in any way in housing, and that, you know, we need to get back to that the government has a role in housing. I also think, you know, I mean, I'm a huge fan of land trusts, and I am not a fan of these nonprofit affordable housing providers. And it goes back to, you know, I think what Kate said earlier in the meeting, that, you know, people have the right to live, you know, with dignity. And somehow these, you know, charity-minded institutions treat people, you know, in some Victorian, you know, laced fashion. And I think that that's really super problematic. You know, one of the reasons we are able to do, though, as much as we are all doing in terms of pushing this question is sadly because it's gotten so bad. And, you know, I think we just have to keep pushing and keep demanding, and we're gonna, you know, I don't know, I somehow get all of these alerts from Canada because some of the words I have Google alerted, and it's interesting. They just did a study in Canada, and something like 70% of the government, 70% of the respondents believe that the government needs to get back into having the job of building housing again. We're not Canada. They seem to be much nicer up there, but I think if somebody did a similar poll here, they would say the same thing.
Thank you, Leah. I so appreciate you making the time, and I'm flattered that this is the most exciting Zoom meeting you've been on for a while. That's a beautiful compliment. If you can indulge me for a second, isn't it true that all housing is public housing? What do I mean by that? In terms of the government, the people giving permits, subsidies for materials, regulations, ordinances. It's the developers that are the middleman always, not the government. But it's been the change in perception in recent decades that somehow the government is the middleman that has to be deferential to developers and their wants. Isn't it a culture change? Is there anything to what I'm saying, or no?
Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting take on it. I do think, though, that, you know, from a more academic perspective, I think that we look at American housing as being something that has just been privatized always, where other you know, there's kind of this analysis that in many places your work was tied to your housing, and that it was in the United States where those things were separated because of when colonialization happened here. So I don't know. I mean, I you know, I actually teach a class on housing law, and so I may be going too deep in it. But yeah, I mean, you know, under the international law, you know, where we say that housing, you know, everyone has a human right to adequate housing, and accessibility is what they talk about, which I think does capture, like, if you use that in the international framework, I think gets closer to what we all mean when we're forced into using the word affordable. You know, it is the government's job to provide this housing. I mean, that's this framework. I mean, it sounds like we're so, as Americans, not used to talking this way, but kind of the rest of the world has accepted that the government is supposed to. But that's one thing that's unique about the United States, is that we have privatized, we've been a country that has done very little as a community. You know, like the fire department is probably the beginning and the end of it.
There's a lot of people, there's a lot of collectives that have to be in place for people to be individualists. Thank you so much, Leah. Carol, back to you.
Can I ask
I
Leah
think
one quick
Margot
question?
had her hand up.
Oh, Margot, I'm so sorry. Margot, go ahead. I didn't mean to overlook you.
Thank you. I was responding to Tony's question about what is affordable. Well, according to the law, the affordable is the median household income for the county. So in Alameda and Contra Costa County, affordable housing is for people with less than $100,000 a year. That's their definition. And low-income housing is people with less than $71,000 a year. And people with very low income are people with less than $58,000 a year. So that's the problem. I was interested in hearing what the woman from Hayward said when they said their median household income was $68,000 a year. Well, that's if that's the law, those people will get truly affordable housing. But with the law the way it is in Alameda and Costa Contra County, our affordable will never be affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Margot.
Okay, we're gonna need to move on to the next speaker. We still have 3 speakers. We have Margot, Alfred, and Kalimah Priforce, who's gonna be next and introduced by our secretary, Gordon Miller.
Unmuted now. This has been a fantastic session. Late stage capitalism doesn't seem to be working out very well. And I have the honor of introducing Kalimah Priforce, and he's just a kid from Oakland, and he's the friendly neighborhood activist in Emeryville City Council as a former serial entrepreneur, local democracy advocate, and Bay Area pioneer of the Learn to Code movement before becoming California's first Haitian American elected official and an Assembly District 18 Democrat state delegate for Oakland, Emeryville, and Alameda. At 8 years old, he led a successful hunger strike at a group home, and he launched his first high-tech venture at age 16. This is quite a record. Driven by the traumatic loss of his 18-year-old brother to gun violence, he became founder and CEO of Kino and That isn't like the game you play in Nevada. It's QEYNO Labs, an echoing green-funded social enterprise, and he was a recipient of the Champion of Change Award from the Obama White House. He's a member of Oakland's Black Progressive Parish, St. Columba, and he continues to bring the attitude towards life of public service is a life not lived in vain. So take it away, Kalimah.
Thank you, everyone. It's always good to see all of you. Many of you I count us friends and friends to be. A big shout out to Jovita and our neighborhood voices, which I'm a part of. Thank you, Gordon. St. Columba was mentioned, and of course I had Mass today. But after Mass, there was a writer of the book Playing God, and I think I just tweeted a book signing that she did. And in it, she talks about how dark money is actually influencing the Catholic Church. And a lot of it has to do with that, with all of the sex abuse scandals and lawsuits that the right wing of the church is looking for funding sources. And some of those funding sources are from billionaires. And so with that relationship of the Catholic Church being, in terms of these bishops, particularly in the United States, being this huge lobbying group, and then of course the church being influenced, the prevalence of dark money, and the reason why I mentioned that is because what we've been seeing all across the state of California and really around the country and around the world is the influence of developer dark money in our politics. And so, many of you know that I'm the council member out of Emeryville, and Emeryville is one of the shining jewels of YIMBY and YIMBYism. And with our city council and just the history of Emeryville that has, in many ways, if I were to ask everyone here to raise your hand if you're from Emeryville, right, you won't see a whole lot of hands. And the reason why is because Emeryville, the history of corruption in Emeryville has allowed Emeryville, which our family median income is around anywhere between 112,000 to around 116,000, right? Very different compared to, it's almost twice of Hayward. And so with that amount of wealth, Emeryville, the politicians that have, in the past have been able to control Emeryville with a lot of corruption to keep Emeryville from being influenced by, oh my God, those progressives from Oakland and Berkeley and Alameda. And of course, information about what happens in Emeryville from going to you all. And since my election, so if you can imagine what it takes to win and to win big in Emeryville, it took a lot of coalition building, and it's the coalition building that I'll be using this year. And that coalition building is listening to renters for the first time in Emeryville's history, renters being brought on board. So I've been working with, shout out to Berkeley Tenant Union, on not just creating a tenant union, but creating a tenant union inside of a neighborhood group. And so that's been my work in Emeryville. Most recently, I shout out to Laura that I had our housing committee look at what Concord is doing, what Larkspur is doing, what other cities are doing. And so for the first time in a very long time, Emeryville is now looking at its tenant protections and reviewing our tenant protections in ways where we can actually start because we actually we had an opportunity to look after our BMR residents. And I am so not only am I a renter, I'm a BMR renter, so not only look at our tenant protections, but look at how our corporate landlords have been using certain tactics to manipulate and rent gouge. And I'm actually preparing a letter to the Department of Justice, who are investigating property managers like Essex and Avalon, who have a heavy presence in Emeryville, that are just bad actors. And so there's a lot that's happening in Emeryville that I'm working on, but a lot of my work is also just being a movement builder. As some of you know, that I'm not afraid to punch Yimby in the nose, right? Like, I'm not afraid to be on Twitter and social media, or to be at events, really fighting for local democracy to happen. And a lot of my work, including supporting folks like Kate Harrison, folks like Margot Smith, right? Like folks like many of you all who are in many ways fighting this good fight, but bringing particularly Black and Brown people to this conversation, and how. Thank you, Laura, for mentioning about bike lanes and its link to gentrification. How NIMBY exclusionism doesn't work, and YIMBY gentrification doesn't work. And so, how do we get to a place where we can have what I call RIMBY, which is reparations in my backyard? How do we get to policies that can actually repair some of the structural racism and inequities that have most impacted not just people of color, but especially working people who are working to create that prosperity for themselves. And so I'll be succinct and stop there and take any questions.
Wow.
Okay, it looks like Mark has a question.
Yeah, Kalimah, I just want to underscore everything that you said. Emeryville, just the way people talked about it, has been widely considered a city where the developers call the shots and renters and workers have been sidelined. Your election is a crack in that firewall. And so I wanted to explore the politics of tenants' rights and housing for working people, particularly in Emeryville. Developers in their lobby, they have massive amounts of money, and they are deep in the propaganda game. And I know that you're right now in the crosshairs of the moneyed interests right now. So I want you to tell us, what are the biggest obstacles to get to renter-centric policies on the municipal level that you're encountering?
So thank you. So a lot of it is, of course, that I'm the minority on the city council, but hopefully this year I can change that. I've soft announced that I'm running for mayor, but because I'm not on, I'm not legally on the ballot, then it would be running 3 candidates against the incumbents. And so I've been working with several groups in order to make that happen. So that's a big thing, is just a change of leadership. But I think that the change of leadership is really important in terms of how do we have this discussion. And I think what's happening, the reason why that fissure was able to happen, and then teaming up with Aaron Peskin, who's running for mayor in San Francisco, and Dean Preston and Jackie Felder, and several others who are all at the front lines against this the housing policies that are coming from Sacramento. A lot of it is shifting the language from community organizing, and I know we're married to that term, to community leadership. And what does and I think that is something that it resonated with people, to activate tenant groups within each of the different areas. I have a map of Emeryville, and I keep adding pins as to groups that I'm organizing within each part of Emeryville, right? And so I go, okay, I can't go to that house because that's a council member stays there, but their neighbor next door, let's see if I can get their neighbor next door. Oh, this case, I see this multifamily housing there. Let me see if I can get that. And so having all of these town halls, but awakening the leadership in people there and letting them know that we can all sort of work together, and that leadership is about working together. And I think that is what I feel is missing, that I'm trying to change, is how do we all sort of talk to one another, because I believe the progressive movement is a movement worth fighting for, but that can only really happen if we're all on the same page.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Any other questions right now? I have one if there are no others. And I'll throw this out basically to everybody. What happened to the 30% rule of thumb that banks used to use? I think it disappeared in the inflation of the 80s. And what about single and combined incomes? 30% of which income?
So I believe your question is about like affordability and how affordability is determined. So here's what I've seen. And so in addition to having Emeryville investigate starting its own rent registry for the first time, like these are the conversations are happening for the first time in Emeryville's history. So in addition to that, I've had, and we had a couple of interns who are now looking at evictions. And for the first time in Emeryville's history, we're looking at that. And a lot of it has to do with actually fees. So a lot of landlords, what they'll do is, and these are corporate landlords who they'll tack on fees, and then the fees will count as a cause eviction that they can use to evict people. And so so some of you who live in units like mine, where trash can be $60 a month, and then trash can be $150 per month, right? And so because they're passing that cost over to the renters if they can't fill the units. So their vacancies somehow I have to pay for. And because of these fees, most recently we passed we uncoupled parking from leases, right? But what landlords did, even though they didn't qualify to do that, they were able to go back to everyone who received free parking or a parking spot attached to their lease. They were able to say, okay, well, now you have to pay for your lease, right? And so now you've got another added fee, and there's no limit to how much you can charge for parking. I don't know how many of you know that, right? And so, well, definitely not in Emeryville. And so that is a way that they're using to sort of push and make it uncomfortable for people, for people. And so, so the person's income can stay what it is, but they, as it relates to what I would say, the core rent. But if you're adding fees, then that is how you can make it unaffordable to those, especially who are in affordable units.
Any other hands, please? I guess at this point, I'll hand it back to Carol.
All right, moving along here. We have two more people to hear from, both of whom are going to be introduced by Michael Chang, who is the treasurer of our revolution. It's Margot Smith, and then Alfred Twu. Go ahead.
You probably saw Margot's name earlier this year on the ballot. And some friend asked Margot, what if you really get elected? Her name will be on the November ballot. And the likelihood of her getting elected is getting higher by the minute. And earlier people talk about affordability. I think Margot told you about affordability, and she has some more philosophical things to say about it. So the microphone is yours, Margot. But there's another fact that you probably don't know. Margot and I went to the same university, the University of Hawaii.
Yes, we're both alumni of the University of Hawaii. Yay from UH. Anyway, thank you very much, Michael. Yes, this session was just incredible. I can't tell you how much I've learned about things that I thought, well, I knew I didn't know very much, but now I know how much I don't know. Anyway, I'm running for state assembly against Buffy Wicks in District 14. And the reason that I'm running is because she had no opposition on the last election in 2022. And there were many, many issues that I disagree with. And the main one is the housing issue. She is in the pocket of Scott Wiener in San Francisco, and she votes for everything that he tells her to. And the latest one was mentioned earlier, was 1893, which lowers the amount of affordable housing that's allowed to be built. And of course, affordable, what does that mean? You know, we just talked about that. And it's a gift to developers. They can bypass their local city councils. They can put a house anywhere they can buy a piece of land, and they can weaken the environmental laws. And it's really undemocratic, because what the state has been doing in all of these housing laws is taking jurisdiction powers away from city councils and counties. Now, city councils are local people, and they're people that we elect. It's a democratic process. And the local city councils know where the earthquake faults are. They know where the landslides are. They know where the fire evacuation routes are. They know where the fire hazard areas are. They know where the erosions are. And they should be considered when developers come along and want to build housing. And what are these developers doing for rentals? Practically zero. They can, if a building is building 10 apartments and they have 2 low-income apartments, according to the inclusionary law, they can give those apartments to their management. They don't have to rent them to local, low-income people. They can hire their janitor in there. I mean, it's so corrupt. And so I'm running for office, and I'm hoping to gain the support of the people who need rent laws, and the people who need environmental laws, and the people who need reparations, and to restore affirmative action. I have a whole list of causes that I'm for, and they won't surprise any of us on the left here, I'm sure. But it's time to get some people in Sacramento who can advocate for the people and not for the moneyed and the developers. And that's what I plan to do. And I hope, and I got 18,000 votes in the primary, which is twice as much as the Republican. And so I'm going to be on the November ballot. And so now I'm looking for a campaign manager to help me garner some votes. And I plan to work as hard as I can. And all I need is 30% more, and I'll win. And I hope that I hope that all the rent issues that you've brought up today, which are really mind-blowing. I had no idea the complexity of it, and the convolutedness of it, and the strength of the opposition. It's been a real strong learning experience for me. And I know I'm going to have to learn a lot in the next few years if I'm elected too. But thank you very much.
Any comments and questions for Margot?
I have one comment. I am so glad that you ran, because I've had to leave that space on the ballot vacant, because there's no way I'd ever vote for Buffy. So I was thrilled to be able to vote for you.
Thank you very, very much.
Future.
Can Margot put her donation link on the chat? I'd be happy to donate to you.
Thank you very, very much. I'll put my website on there, and it has a donation button.
Awesome. Thank you.
Vita, you have found your people. This is your tribe.
I've been so lonely. Like Leah said, I've been very lonely.
Paola has a question or a comment. Go ahead.
Yes, I was very happy to go door knocking and canvassing for Margot and giving out her information. But I do have a question, Margot. Do you have any idea of those 18,000 votes, how many of them came from Berkeley?
Yes, I have that figure. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but I have a figure on how many votes came from Berkeley and how many came from other parts. The district goes all the way from Piedmont up to Hercules. And curiously enough, I've had votes, a good strength of votes outside of Berkeley, and I was really pleased about that. I've been going to events up in Hercules. I went to an event in Hercules last week. It was called State of the City, and they had the local layers give speeches on State of the City, and all the politicos were there, Jeremy and the Board of Supervisors and the mayors and everybody. And I never felt so welcomed in my whole life. Everybody had such a positive response to my running. It was very heartwarming because I hadn't run into that before at such a level. Yeah.
Well, I'm thrilled you ran. I'm thrilled you ran. I'm so happy.
Thank you. I'm hoping that if I happen to win by 2026, I hope that someone younger and vital will come along and say they know that they can run and win that office and carry our message forward, the one we're doing today. Maybe Priforce could do it.
Any others? Okay, if none, I'm gonna introduce the next speaker, who is Alfred Twu. And many of you know Alfred as a community organizer, worker, and are very participating on a housing issue. And I know Alfred because I have a lot of questions about the political machinery. He always answers my questions, and I learn a lot from him. And another thing that Alfred does, he draws pictures. The background right now is a picture from San Francisco Chronicle. I don't know if you know anybody whom San Francisco Chronicle devote half the page to him or her. Alfred is one example. So, Alfred, tell us what you think about housing. The microphone's yours.
Sure. So I think a great way to tie this all in at the end is to connect housing with everything else in politics. We often talk about how do we get the developer to pay? How do we get the landlord to do their fair share? But we also got to look at that whole rest of the economy that's just not working. Like one of the great sayings I've heard around housing is that housing cannot simultaneously be both affordable and good investment. Because obviously the people who are trying to buy a home or trying to rent a home, they want prices to be as low as possible. But if there are people who are investing in housing as a way to make money by having the value go up, that is going to be a contradiction. Where you can't have it go up and be good for both people, and you can't have it go down and be good for both people. And to really address that, we really got to think about, all right, there are going to be things people want to invest in, maybe they're saving for retirement or something. How can we make that something else that's more beneficial, whether it is renewable energy or something else that our economy really needs instead of overpriced housing costs? And likewise, when we think about what's causing the housing costs to go up, well, it's because here in the Bay Area, there are a lot of high-paying jobs that have come in. But the companies that are behind this, the big tech companies, they're not doing anything. Like they're not getting taxed to build the housing that all these people that are coming in and working for those people and supporting those people need to live in. And I know in the coming couple of years, there's going to be a regional ballot measure that's being proposed to fund housing for low-income people throughout the Bay Area. And it's critical that we make sure that the cost of doing that is put on those who are most responsible for that, the big businesses that are driving up the cost of living. Because otherwise, if we're just relying on the housing industry to fix the housing crisis, that's not going to take too long. But if we get the whole economy putting in their part, then we've got a much better chance of making progress. Thank you.
Do I have any questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question. I have a request of two things. One, could you say a little bit about the Renters Caucus in the Democratic Party? And could you also talk a little bit about the signing that a lot of us are doing that you're managing?
Sure. So at the California Democratic Party, there's a renters council that was set up a few years ago to make sure that tenants' issues are represented. So things we do are we put on events at the different conferences that the party holds that people go to learn about what kind of legislation is being proposed, what's going on locally, who's running for office. And then when people are running for state assembly or state senate, we bring them in and we ask them, all right, where do you stand on tenant protections? Do you promise to support rent control? And not everyone will do that, but we can make sure we get people on record so we know where they stand. And we've supported many candidates, some of them who have been elected, like Aisha Wahab, that we've seen today, as well as some people who are currently running, like Jovanka Beckles. So I would put the links for the Renters Council in the chat later, but you can also look us up at California Democratic Renters Council. And we'll be having our next meeting virtually in mid-May as part of the Democratic Party Executive Board Conference. And finally, as people mentioned earlier, we are currently also working on getting signatures for the Berkeley Tenant Protection Right to Organize ballot measure. We've got another month or so to go to get these signatures to expand tenant protections, lower the maximum rent increase each year, and create a right to organize a tenants union similar to that of a labor union. So of course, the landlords, being who they are, they have their rival ballot measure, which you should not sign. The landlords, they call their thing rent relief. But what it really does is it takes money out of our city's low-income housing fund that's used to build low-income housing and puts that money in the pockets of landlords. That's what they call rent relief. So do not sign the landlord rent relief measure. You want to sign the tenants union, tenant protection, and right to organize measure. And if any of you can help out with that, just talking with your neighbors, knocking doors, whatever commitment you want, from a little as much as you want, just let me know. I'll put my contact info in the chat. Send me an email and I can get you a packet. Thank you.
Margot, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. Well, I wanted to say that there's also a lot of interest in social housing recently in the legislature, and I hope that we can have a word about that. The Gray Panthers is going to be putting a session on social housing this next month, and I hope, I think Ms. Wahab is going to be on that. So I'll be sending out a notice about that. We really got to get the legislature interested in housing people and not just making money off of housing. You know, government has to have some responsibility for housing their citizens. And that's what I find is lacking. We don't have that drive to house our citizens so people are healthy and living good lives. And we need that moral instinct to take hold, as well as just making money and how it's going to be funded.
It'd be nice if we can have the Environmental Protection Act, the clean water and air is minimum, say housing. That'll be someday. But anyway, Paola has a hand up.
Yes, I just want to add that I'm one of those people collecting signatures, and I have run into signature collectors for the landlords, and they're quite frankly lying and what they're saying to get people to sign. And so it's just very disheartening that they're paying people to get signatures and then they're lying. So it's just one of those things. But I'm really appreciative that Alfred is running this, and Berkeley Tenants Union, and I know our Revolution, we're doing our best to get those signatures so that we'll have enough to get online. and get it in November. Thank you.
Right. Any others?
I just want a big shout out to Paola, who has collected more signatures, I think, than anybody. And Carol, I think you were like second when I was looking at the list. So just want to thank you guys as leadership. You're really making such a difference.
Thank you, Leah. And I'm on my way to fill up that second form right now because I do want to get 150 signatures. That's my goal.
Well, all right. I guess we've heard from all the speakers. I thought this was an outstanding forum today. Just what everybody brought to it was just what we needed to hear. So I really, from the bottom of my heart, thank every one of you for being here. I guess that yeah, stop recording.